talk to us about issues that might not necessarily pertain to API communities, but also things that we should really care about, being minorities and contributing to this kind of circle of activism. So I just want to say thank you for all of our panelists today. You will be hearing from them, and there are different topics that they're going to be talking about. So yeah, for anyone concerned about the time, we are predicting that it's going to run from an hour, 30 minutes to a little bit longer. So if you have any conflictions with that, just to give you a better picture. But I guess we will get right into it. So Tony, you want to switch to another slide? Okay, so firstly, we just want to reiterate the point of this community webinar because clearly, with the pandemic happening and also Black Lives Matter, the political climate is getting really heated up. So there's a lot of political turmoil happening right now. And we feel that it's really important that young people come together to create a sort of communal impact through webinars like this one. So thank you everyone for being here. The first thing we want to do is sort of an optional icebreaker. So we want you to tell us who you are, your name, your pronouns, your grade, and your city, and then answer 2 of these prompts. But before we do that, I do want to go over like our Zoom etiquette. So if you want to say something, type ready in the chat box and then we'll call on you. So like not everybody talks at the same time. And when you're not saying anything, mute yourself so others can speak without background distractions. And also, can you rename yourself by having your name and your pronouns next to it? I think a way to do that is to hover over your profile, click the 3 dots, and then there is a rename option there. So it would be great if everyone could, have their name and then their pronouns right next to their name because it would help us avoid misgendering. So if anybody wants to start with the icebreaker, tell us a little bit about them and answer either of the 2 prompts, that would be great. Just put ready in the chat box. Okay, awesome. Okay, I'm gonna go with Rye.
Hi, I'm Rye. My pronouns are he, him. I'm an incoming senior. Oh God, I'm old. I'm an incoming senior at Notre Dame High School in San Jose, California. And I guess something I wish to communicate to everyone today in this webinar is that people of color really have a voice, and when we all come together, we can enact change.
All right, awesome. Thank you so much. Rai is actually one of our panelists, so you'll be hearing more from him throughout the webinar, but let's move on to Tejas.
Hi, everyone. I'm Tejas. My pronouns are he, him. I'm also a rising senior. I'm old too, and I'm from Richmond, Virginia. And one way I hope to strengthen solidarity in the community at large, the AAPI community, of course, but our virtual community is by understanding that no one issue just pertains to one race. Every single issue is intersectional. It applies to all different races, and that we have to come together in order to solve those issues.
Hey, thank you so much, Tejas. The next one is Alice.
Hi, I'm Alice. My pronouns are she, her. I'm going into sophomore year and I'm from New Orleans. And one thing I'd like to communicate with everybody is I am white and I've benefited from white privilege, and I just want to educate myself as to the political issues going on in today's climate.
Okay, awesome. Thank you so much. Next we have Amira.
Hi everyone, my name is Amira. Pronouns is she, her. I actually just graduated from high school, so everyone's saying that they feel old going into senior year. It makes me feel ancient. But I guess I'm one of the panelists as well, and one way that, actually I'll just say something I kind of want to communicate today that is actually not going to be in my presentation, but I just want to emphasize the importance of normalizing that it's okay to change your points of view once you learn new information, normalizing that it's okay to learn and grow and understand that even if you were wrong at one point, that you're willing to build yourself up from your previous points of view. So yeah.
All right, thank you so much. Next we have Joy.
Hi, my name is Joy. My pronouns are she, her. I am a rising junior in Houston, Texas. And one way I hope to strengthen solidarity in my community is be the best ally I can be and practice intersectional activism. So I don't want to be selective about the issues that I advocate for. I want everyone to feel included.
Okay, awesome. Thank you, Joy. Next we have Sasha.
Hi, I'm Sasha. My pronouns are she, her. I'm a rising sophomore, and I go to Dwight Englewood, which is in New Jersey, which is closer to the city. One way that I hope to strengthen solidarity in my community is that, so I actually signed up for this with my two other friends who are in the call, Misha and Bodhi, and actually, so we got really involved with the diversity work at our school this year, and especially Misha and I are leaders next year for our Asian Affinity group, and I think that I really just want to make sure that not just within our affinity group, but we talk to other affinity groups and try and strengthen solidarity within the different races so that we can all come together and communicate better.
Okay, thank you so much, Sasha. Next we have Ariel.
Hi, it's pronounced Ariel, by the way.
Sorry.
But it's okay. Pronouns she, they. I honestly don't really care. It's whatever. Grade. I'm a rising freshman. I'm gonna be at Rice in Houston in the fall. So that's pretty exciting. And then something that I kind of want to communicate, or I guess kind of going off of, I forget who said it earlier, but basically changing, it's okay to change your ideas, obviously, because if you find new information, then you can make a new conclusion. But then even then, it's still okay to disagree when it comes to certain conclusions. When it comes to POC solidarity, there isn't just one way or one method. So that's kind of also the purpose of this today, is just to hear different sides of the story.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you so much. Next we have Miano. Correct me if I'm wrong, but yeah, go ahead.
You actually got that first try. I'm very impressed. So hi, my name's Miana Miller. I'm a rising freshman at Northwestern University, so I just graduated high school. And I think one thing that's important to keep in mind is that when you talk about racism, it's not just overt racism from people's actions. Racism can also mean systemic racism that is coming from the systems created by people hundreds of years ago who participated in overt racism. So it's important to distinguish between the two while also being able to specifically discuss each type of racism, I guess. That's my piece.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you so much for sharing. Next we have Olivia.
Hi, Noah. I'm Olivia. My pronouns are she, her, hers. I'm in New Orleans, and I'm going to be a sophomore next year. One way I hope to strengthen solidarity in my community is to communicate issues and problems everyone's facing and think about equitable and sustainable solutions to solve them.
Thank you so much. We have Felix.
Hi, I'm Felix Edberg. My pronouns are she, her, hers. I'm a rising sophomore. I was born in Guatemala, but I live in Richmond, Virginia, and I'm a panelist. And something I want to communicate today is that I'm coming as a part of the Indigenous community, but I want people to know that I'm obviously not the only Indigenous source out there, and there are so many of us, and it's important not to only listen to me about Indigenous issues and to listen to other creators as well.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Next we have Toby.
Hi everyone. My name is Toby. She, her, hers pronouns. I'm actually a panelist, and I am a incoming college freshman, so I'll be going to Stanford next year, but I live in Roanoke, Virginia right now. And something I really want to communicate in this webinar is that identity doesn't exist in a vacuum, and sweeping generalizations really will never work when discussing activism or intersectionality, because the whole point is that everything is different and everything is interconnected.
Awesome. Thank you so much. We have Misha.
Hi, I'm Misha. My pronouns are she, her. I
I'm a rising sophomore and I'm from Clifton, New Jersey. And something that I hope to like strengthen in our community, along with other people, is like changing, like being open to changing your opinion and not staying with something out of pride, but also being like a respectful ally to people who don't understand what it's like to be a POC, because I think that regardless of who they are, we should treat them with respect and like regardless of their ideas as well.
Okay, awesome. Thank you so much. Next we have Gian.
Hi, I'm Gian. My pronouns are she, her. I am a rising senior in Scottsdale, Arizona. And one thing I want to communicate to everyone here is that I am here to listen. I feel like one problem that we've had that not many people have addressed, or not many people have like addressed in the past between like political parties and different races, is that we don't really listen to each other. So we're not as sensitive to issues that people have brought up in the past, because generally we're not willing to listen. So I think it's really important to open up the lines of communications between different people.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you everyone who said ready and shared. I guess I'll go next. My name is Abigail. My pronouns are she, her. I am going to be a rising sophomore in Ben Franklin High School in New Orleans, Louisiana. And one way I hope to strengthen solidarity in our community is holding more webinars like this, where we can all talk to each other and kind of understand each other in a way where it's not scrutinizing. So we actually come out learning something more from webinars like this, and we are, it's safe to ask questions. So I think that's the kind of community I wanted to create by forming this webinar, and I hope that's the end goal that we reach. So I guess we can go on to introducing our panelists in more detail. Oh, okay. So for today's agenda, this is just kind of a breakdown of all of the things that we are going to be discussing. First, we'll allow our presenting panel to share their stories and discuss solidarity and the different topics that they have brought to us today. And then we will open the space up to questions or comments or your own experiences. And we really hope that you'll share with us these experiences, these questions, because this is a space where you are able to express that. And finally, we will introduce some other organizations that our panelists work for and political action groups as well. So, yeah. Okay, finally, we have our 6 panelists. They will be presenting in this order from Felix to Madison. I will allow them to talk about what they do or in more detail, if that's all right with all of them. Okay, Felix, do you want to go first?
Yeah, I work a lot in the space of climate justice, but obviously climate justice intersects with a lot of other issues. So it means talking about racial justice and about Indigenous rights. So I work for groups like 0 Hour, Polluters Out, and Generation Ratified.
Okay, awesome. Thank you. Toby?
Okay, so a lot of my work is in racial justice and LGBT rights. So right now I work with Students for Black Lives, but in the past I've also done a lot of stuff within my community through local organizations, which I think is really important, especially since I live in a predominantly white area. Yeah.
Okay, awesome. Thank you so much. Next we have Ariel.
I'm not really in any type of organization. I'm just kind of like living by example, I guess, like as like a Black queer person. So like, yeah, I'm trying to scope out like new groups to possibly be in at Rice, but right now I'm not up to anything.
Okay, thank you. Next we have Ryan.
Only my mom calls me Ryan. I focus a lot in the area of Black issues and also trans issues, being as I am both Black and trans. So I'm going to be speaking specifically about violence towards Black trans women, because a lot of times, like especially coming off the heels of Pride Month, a lot of times Black trans women are left out of the conversation in both Black and trans issues, even though Black trans women basically started the Pride movement.
Thank you so much. Next we have Amira.
Hi, so I am definitely someone who focuses a lot on racial injustice, especially within the education system. That's something that I'm very passionate about, and I will be studying that at American University this upcoming fall. I'm an incoming freshman, and as of now, throughout the summer, I've been working with an amazing group of people in my community. We call ourselves Black Lives Matter Weston, basically kind of just geared toward dealing with the issue of racial injustice in a predominantly white town and kind of trying to eliminate the stigma that it doesn't happen here just because people don't see it.
Definitely, I agree. Finally, we have Madison. She's actually not here yet because she has something else to do before she gives her presentation. But just as, you know, a brief little bio for her, I know her through the Children and Youth Planning Board for New Orleans. They work on specific issues that affect New Orleans youth here in New Orleans. And there are a variety of things such as mental health issues and education and the financial stability that they focus on. And she is actually the executive director of CYPB's Youth Advisory Board. You know, it is up to her if she wants to go more into detail, but she will be presenting later on. But thank you to all of our panelists for talking about what you do. Let's go to Felix's presentation first.
Okay, hi guys. I'd like to just introduce myself. I am Indigenous. I am from different Indigenous places that are now like Guatemala and Mexico, Latin America, and I'd like to start off with a land acknowledgement. So I'm gonna put a little website link. Obviously this isn't perfect, especially because Indigenous people don't have, a lot of nations don't have rigid borders like we do, so there might be errors, but you're welcome to go find the land upon which you live from this link and drop it in the chat. I come from as a guest on Powhatan land, which is now called Richmond, Virginia, and it's really important to conduct land acknowledgements, especially within organizing spaces, just acknowledging the fact that we are on stolen land and on looted land, and in some way we have benefited from the genocide of Indigenous people. And so acknowledging that is the first step to decolonizing, and acknowledging that we are on stolen land is part of acknowledging the absolute existence of Indigenous people. So it's really important. My next point is, what does it mean to be Indigenous? So there are a lot of different terms: First Nations, Indigenous, Native American, Aboriginal, and all these terms are valid. Each person might identify with a different term, and that's okay. And no one has authority over this. You know, I'm not the authority over whether you can identify with this term or not. Being Indigenous means connection to the land, our customs, our culture, and you can be Indigenous from anywhere, and you can be white and Indigenous, you can be Black and Indigenous, you can be Asian and Indigenous, and it's not just one race can be Indigenous. We can be Indigenous from anywhere, and we exist everywhere, and that's important to recognize as well. It's not just, we don't exist just on reservations, and it's not just a reservation issue. And also reconnecting is valid. You know, if you want to reconnect with your Indigenous roots and you're coming to that reconnecting process as a part of learning, that is totally valid, and it's something that is a journey, and it's hard, but it's part of the process, and it's something you shouldn't feel ashamed of doing. And you know, you're totally valid. Indigenous people look different. There's no one way to look Indigenous, and there's no one way to be Indigenous. Common myths and misconceptions. Because the colonial system doesn't teach us about our Indigenous people, we have a lot of misconceptions about what Indigenous people look like, about our issues. So there's this misconception that all Indigenous people look the same, we all are the same, and that's totally not true. We don't all have powwows, we don't all wear headdresses. That's not how we are. And so realizing that there is so much diversity within this community, and it encompasses many, many different tribes, many, many different nations and peoples is important, and realizing that there is no one way to look Indigenous, there's no one way to be Indigenous. Within the US specifically, there's a lot of conversation that Indigenous people like live for free, we all get government handouts, like we're just living for free, and that's totally not true. And Indigenous people, reservations are in very poor areas. You know, there's a lot of poverty and crime and issues within the Indigenous community that it's important to recognize that even though it might seem like we're living for free, we're not, and there are still so many issues within our community. And it's important to speak on Indigenous issues and realize that Indigenous issues are all issues. And so talking about gun violence, we want to talk gun violence prevention, we want to talk about Indigenous people within this conversation because it's about us too. And a lot of Indigenous people get left out of the conversation about certain issues. Like feminists might forget missing and murdered Indigenous women, which is so important. These are women and girls that are going missing, and it's something that people forget to mention. And it's this whole segment of this population that is disappearing and vanishing. And the fact that people are so hesitant to speak up on this, and it's really important to educate yourself about it. So missing and murdered Indigenous women, there's a lot of things that contribute to this crisis, and it's a very complicated issue, and we can't point to one thing as the cause of it. But many Indigenous women, because of their living circumstances on a reservation or whatnot, can be pressured into doing something, and there's just a lot of crime and stuff on Indigenous land. It could be brought by man camps, which is something that comes along with the fossil fuel industry. You know, they will build camps for pipeline workers to live on Indigenous land that might be unceded or sacred land. And so that brings violence to the women that live there, it brings violence to the land. And it's really important to recognize this as a crisis. Environmental racism. Indigenous people also are victims of environmental racism. It means pipelines are routed through sacred land in violation of treaties. It's on our land. So Dakota Access Pipeline, Keystone XL, Coastal GasLink especially, we saw with the Wet'suwet'en crisis, where they were literally being arrested on their own land, defending their sacred land, defending their water, defending their sacred way of life. And so that's also environmental racism. And there's so many more Indigenous issues because every issue is an Indigenous issue because we exist everywhere. So it's important to include us in the conversation. And Indigenous allyship is mainly what I'm here to talk about. And part of Indigenous allyship is recognizing all issues are Indigenous issues and also recognizing crises like missing and murdered Indigenous women and environmental racism. And it means decolonization, which means self-reflecting on your own mindset. One thing that I'm still decolonizing too. And one example I can point to of decolonization is thinking of Indigenous people as like old ancient people. You know, we talk about the Maya people like they're gone, and that's totally not true. There are still many, many descendants of the Mayan people living today. And so you can sometimes find yourself like searching up in your computer, like, where did the Maya exist? And it's where do the Maya exist? Because we still exist, and it's important to recognize that. And so that's just one way that the colonial mindset can show up in your everyday life. And it means like doing the work the education system should be doing for you already, and doing that work on educating yourself on the land that you live on, educating yourself about Indigenous issues, educating yourself about the Native people near you. It means centering Indigenous leadership and making sure that your organizing spaces have Indigenous leadership and are a safe space for Indigenous people to be in. So it means making your space as decolonized as possible and moving away from like also white supremacist ways of organizing with like a sense of urgency and other things that bring white supremacy into our organizing spaces is really important. And I've included on the next slide, I think, there is some resources on here. You can feel free to take a screenshot or whatever. I really love this book, As Long as Grass Grows. It's about climate justice, and also it does a really good job of also talking through like the history of Indigenous people, within our country. So talking about national parks and how national parks were literally formed by the exploitation of sacred indigenous land, and how we realize we kind of revere these national parks as something within our society, and realizing that it's really has a darker past, and we need to acknowledge that. Invasion is a really good short film about the Wet'suwet'en people's struggle against many pipelines in their community, and it's made by Indigenous people, so it's about their community and it's about their struggle. It's a short documentary that's really good to watch. And then this MMIW's video on YouTube is also really good, just to see, like, they show these people who are at risk up close and personal, and so it's important to learn their stories and talking through it with members of the community. And yeah, that's all I have to say, but I'm looking forward to answering any questions you have too.
Abby, you're muted.
Oh, okay. I'm so sorry. So I put all of the links in chronological order from Felix's last slides. If you want to go check those out, you can click on the links here or screenshot, whatever floats your boat. But thank you so much for talking to us about these Indigenous issues. I definitely agree with you when the voices are really small when advocating for these issues. So it's really important that we are all exposed to these Indigenous issues and learning about them as well. So thank you so much for sharing. Next, we are going to go to Toby. Okay. Yeah, next we're going to go to Toby. I'm going to let her take over now.
All right. Hi, everyone. As I said before, my name is Toby, and I am a graduating senior this year, so I'll be going to college next year. And I'm here to talk about intersectional activism in general, and a little bit more about systemic racism, because I feel like even now there are still a lot of misconceptions about it. But right now I want to start just by saying two really important things that I think will frame what I'm talking about pretty well. So the first thing is that identity and Blackness and Black people, we aren't a monolith. So I think it is really easy to, put Black people in a box and just call us, one demographic. Oh, all Black people think this way, when that is, absolutely not true. Couldn't be farther from the truth, honestly. And Black people are from all over. Not all Black people are African American. Not all African Americans are Black. Not everyone from Africa is Black even. And so we are all very different. And I think that's really important personally, because at least where I'm from, a lot of people will generalize our issues in a really, really harmful way. So I think it's important just to recognize that. And the second thing is that identity doesn't exist in a vacuum. So, we can talk about, Black issues or trans issues or queer issues or, Asian issues and all that stuff, but it doesn't exist in a vacuum. And to think that means you're coming from a point of privilege where these issues don't affect you personally. And I think it's also really easy for people to say, oh, like, let me play devil's advocate, about this issue that really affects, these minority populations. And that can be really, really harmful and detrimental because it takes credibility away from us. If we get emotional, because if we talk about personal experience and we're getting emotional and we're not getting facts and there's no basis for what we're saying, so therefore racism doesn't exist, or homophobia or transphobia doesn't exist, when we know that is absolutely not true. Okay, so that's my presentation. What is intersectional activism and intersectionality in general? Intersectionality is just the idea that all identities and all backgrounds will come together, and that it is harmful and detrimental to any single movement if you don't consider all backgrounds and identities. So, if you are a Black person working for racial justice and you don't include disabled people, you don't include the LGBT community, if you don't include, Muslims or Black Jewish people, or any of these other identities, then it's harmful to your movement because you're not really working for every Black person. So I think this honestly should be paramount in every person's activism, because, maybe, I think, especially in the media, there is a huge tendency to only lift up the Black people who are, maybe conventionally attractive or who are already wealthy or who are already doing well, and say, oh, look, like, just this Black person graduated from Harvard, so it's not okay to be racist. But when really we should be saying, even if a Black person is completely average in every way, even if a Black person breaks the law, that doesn't give white people, that doesn't give the racist systems that we live under, that shouldn't be permission to hurt us unjustly. So I think that's just a really meaningful thing that a lot of people don't really recognize. So personally, I am a Black Nigerian English American queer immigrant. So I definitely know from personal experience that there is not just one identity. I don't just walk through life as a Black person. I don't just walk through life as a woman. I don't just walk through life as a lesbian, I have all these identities that every single day impact me in different ways. And the ways that maybe being a Black queer person impacts me isn't something that other people would think about. The ways that being a Black immigrant impacts me isn't maybe something that someone who's just an immigrant would think about. So it is really important in your personal activism to think, oh, am I excluding anyone when I say, Black Lives Matter, when I am fighting for Indigenous rights and things like this. And I think we can really see this in non-Black communities because for other minority groups, I think it becomes very easy to say, oh, like, I face discrimination too. So, like, I kind of understand this and it's not my fight to fight, or I'm doing well personally, so they should just do better, they should just be better. But, we're not the same. We all have very, very different circumstances as Black people, as Indigenous people, as Asian people, as, Pacific Islander people. All of the way that we got here, like to America or to wherever you are, is very different. So the way Indigenous people exist is very different than the way Black people exist. And we need to recognize that so that we don't label each other, so we don't label other communities as monolith, because that is very, very damaging. I've seen it personally in my community, where rich white students with generational wealth on their side will say, oh, I don't understand why, maybe so-and-so Black student isn't doing as well as, as I am, when, they've had to face all these trials and tribulations that the white student has never had to face. So it really blinds you to a big part of life and a big part of other people's lives. And that kind of goes into systemic racism as well. So what is systemic racism, first of all? Systemic racism is basically, structural or systemic racism is the idea that the entire system that we live under, like the overarching idea and laws and foundation and everything that governs our way of living is racist, is fundamentally racist. And I think the common misconception that people have with that a lot of times is to confuse that with systematic racism, where racism is codified. So racist people perpetuate the racist system. So a lot of people think, oh, if there's no racist people in power, then the system will suddenly become not racist, when that's not true. Even if there are no racist people in power, the system will still be racist. It will still impact minority, it will still impact people of color, twice as much as it impacts other people. An example of that would be education. We can see this super easily with zoning and public schools. I don't want to talk too much about this because I think someone else is going to be talking about racism in education. But really quickly, I will touch on this and I will say that because, schools are funded by taxes, by property taxes. So the richer your area, the better your school. And if you live in a poor area, which are more proportionately Black and people of color, because of systemic racism that has not allowed us to build generational wealth like it has allowed white people, our schools are underfunded more than predominantly white schools. And this perpetuates a system where we get a worse education, and because people are getting a worse education, they have less opportunities in the future, and they have less opportunities to start or build this generational wealth, which is like really, really important. So I'll talk a little bit about medical racism right now as well. This is another example of systemic racism. The history of modern pain medicine, a lot of people don't know this, but it was tested almost exclusively on Black slaves, especially Black slave women. And that is where we get a lot of these misconceptions that are still prevalent today in medicine, that Black people feel less pain because, we have less nerves or our skin is like physically thicker, which of course is completely untrue. But there are a lot of doctors, a lot of medical professionals who still believe that today. And that is one of the reasons why Black people have to try the hardest to get pain medicine. Black people are more likely to die from cancer. Black people are more likely to suffer from chronic pain. Black people are more likely to have anxiety and depression. But more than that, Black people are likely to go through life with these issues undiagnosed because medical professionals will not believe them. Out of any demographic in America, Black women die the most in childbirth. And that is because a lot of times doctors will not believe our pain. And that stems from, hundreds of years ago when the father of modern pain medicine would test on Black women and would infer that we feel pain differently, which is really harmful. So really quickly, what can we do about this? Let's talk about performative versus real allyship really quickly. Performative allyship, I'm sure most of you all are familiar with that. Maybe you have friends or people in your community who posted a Black square, who posted Black Lives Matter on their Instagram story and didn't do much else. That is, I know a lot of people will think, doing something is better than doing nothing. But in actuality, it really isn't, because these people will still have racist ways of thinking, racist thinking patterns. And that is really harmful, and they won't recognize that because, oh, I posted this Black square. Oh, I said Black Lives Matter. So I think what everyone as a good ally should do is call out these people. If you see someone saying Black Lives Matter, but they're not living that way, if they're saying Black Lives Matter, but they're saying the N-word, then as a good ally, it's your role to call them out, to say, oh, you can do better. And then we're talking about our organizations more at the end, so I will leave that till later. And I think that's it.
Okay, thank you so much, Toby. That was really informative. I think next we will move on to Ariel, if that's okay. Okay, awesome. Ariel, I'm going to pass it to you.
Okay. So basically, I kind of just want to talk about racism as a whole and why it's still a thing, which I know is a really big task. So obviously, it's going to be kind of glossed over. But just for people that don't really understand why it's so ingrained in our society and why it's such a problem, I'm kind of just gonna go over the basics, right? So we have the roots of racism, which is in slavery. 15th century Portuguese sailors went over to Africa because they just figured out how to travel long distances. And when they got there, they saw a bunch of Black people. So then they were like, oh, I've never seen anybody like this, or at least this dark, because there was still some diaspora coming from Africa at that time. But obviously people in Central Europe weren't interacting with Black people at all. So then that's why slavery started, because they found these different looking people, and then they decided that they were animals, not actual people, and then started bringing them back to Europe, so you use that slave. So after that period of time, we have the indoctrination of racism and why people were so easily led to believe why it actually makes sense to be racist. So you have state-conditioned indoctrination of racism, which we saw through imperialism. Basically, when these countries would go into Africa or Asia or wherever it is they went, and tried to like enforce their version of life onto these people, and like this colonialism that was state backed. So then obviously people like in the military or the government were more prone to also believing in racism because they thought that this was good, like going to go get more land so that we can get more money and we can get more crops. So it was easier for them to fall into that line of thinking. But even if you weren't like related to the government, like if you weren't like a white man, then you were still socially conditioned into believing racism. So I kind of like divided it into like scientific versus kind of like sociology almost, because today we kind of even have that divide. Like some people are like, oh, science only, and then other people are like, oh, but this is how humanity works. But again, racism, it's still in both things. So kind of like Toby was talking about, medical and like just like scientific racism is still prevalent today because all this stuff was based off of racist beliefs. So kind of this like evolution, we know most people believe that like Black people were closer to apes than they were to humans. Now we know that as like that's scientifically false. We're all like from the human race. And then also taxonomy, so which we learn in biology is like the different like types of species. So you know you have like Homo, sapien, sapien, whatever. The original man for that, Carl Linnaeus, I think his name was, basically said that like Black people weren't a human species, they were an ape species, which kind of goes hand in hand with evolution. And then forensics as well, which is where we get the divide for Caucasian, Negroid, and like Mongoloid. So those different divisions were also invented by a white man who looked at a skull from the Caucasus Mountain and was like, oh, this skull looks really pretty. I bet white people have this type of skull, because there was no way to actually like look at the DNA between like that skull and actual descendants like of white people. So it was literally all just made up basically. Today that forensics is still kind of used, but not to the same extent that like you can for sure tell that a body is definitely like Black by their bone structure. And then even more modernly, we see phrenology, which was like the study of your head shape. And a lot of people would say that like slaves had, like all Black people had a little dent in the back of their head, which is like a common trait anyway for most people. Like if you feel in the back of your head, you might have like a little dimple, like where the end of your skull is supposed to be, but that's really just because that's where your skull ends. So they use that as justification, saying like scientifically, Black people are more subservient, therefore they should be slaves. But if you weren't into the science side of the world at that time, you could still believe in social Darwinism. So basically saying like, oh, we have to go help these poor Black people because their way of life is so backwards and they have no economy, which is totally false. Just because they weren't using like the typical shillings that a European person might have used, it wasn't, you know, anything that someone had to go in and fix. And then you also have like evangelists that came from religion. So you have like the Crusades, and then you even have like modern day mission trips that are still very damaging to Africa because of the fact that you have these people come in and basically like lure them in with promises of like houses or food or whatever it may be to adhere to this religion, but they don't even really fully understand the extent of what's going on because of like language barrier, cultural barrier, and all those types of things. Okay, so I have another slide. Okay, so then basically, oh wait, where's the plus? Okay, so basically why racism is still a thing, now we're actually onto like the title of what I'm talking about. We have the perpetuation of it. So basically we've been going through these conflicts and then resulting resolutions that end in inequity that kind of led up to this point of Black Lives Matter, right? So at first in America, we had like the Civil War, you know, the fight for the South to keep their right to own slaves. And then out of that, we had Reconstruction, which a lot of people in US history learned that this was like a beneficial time for Black people and just like really invigorating society or whatever, that like, yes, Black people aren't slaves. That is totally wrong. Because in a lot of history books, especially in Florida, I know there's like the story of the first Black senator or whatever. They actually didn't let him vote. So even though like they say that he was the first Black senator, he never got to cast a vote because they said that he basically, like, since he was Black, he couldn't cast a vote on white people's issues. And since they weren't talking about Black people's issues, there was no issue for him to vote on. And he was like the only one there. So Reconstruction built this inequity, and then we saw Jim Crow and we saw the Black codes. And this continued all the way up until civil rights. which is another conflict that we saw, rioting in the streets, buildings burning down, people being beat up and murdered, which then this led to the current inequity that we see in modern systems, such as the criminal justice system and the school to prison pipeline. So the current criminal justice system is basically built to continue slavery because during Reconstruction, this actually happened. The police were formed into basically like slave catchers and trying to catch Black people being Black. That was the whole purpose of like Southern police force. If they saw like a Black person doing something that they didn't like, you would go to jail and then you would join chain gang. And yeah, it's basically just like prison, state endorsed slavery. And then now, like Toby kind of touched on with like disparities in education, we have the school to prison pipeline. So if you're in an impoverished area, your school is going to be more likely to be bogged down by crime. And then therefore you're probably more likely to go to prison or jail, and you just end up in the system all over again. So you can't accomplish generational wealth or even just status in general, because half of the people, well, not half, I don't know the statistic, a lot of people going into prison and simply just because of like racial profiling. So now we're at the end. Sorry if this is kind of a little bit long. Again, I told you I'm trying to squeeze in a lot of stuff. But you have complacence, which is what we're stuck in now. Like with Black Lives Matter, we're trying to get this next conflict started so that we can at least get some push towards equality. Again, it's never going to be perfect because it can't be, but we can always continue to push for perfection. But now you have people, both white people and non-Black people who are complacent in racism. So you have white people have white privilege, and then either they can stay in this sense of white privilege and never acknowledge it, because the best way to protect your privilege is to deny its existence. So you have those people, or you have some people who do recognize their white privilege, right? But then those people tend to also have white guilt, which then they'll feel like, oh, it's my fault that all these things are happening to all these Black people, or I could be doing more to help Black people. Which if you're an activist, then that's all that we ask you to do is just be a good ally and a good activist. But then after you have all this buildup of guilt, you lead to fatigue, which is like a newer word, allyship fatigue, where people feel like they're just doing too much, which it is emotionally draining to continue to be an activist. But then it just leads right back into this complacence, and then you forget why you're fighting in the first place, and then you end up right back at step one with white privilege. Of just being able to say, well, I'm tired of, being anti-racist. It's like, well, how do you think people of color feel? Not to be like antagonizing, but that's just like, you just end up repeating this cycle if you get into this white guilt and white. And then non-Black people of color, it's nearly the same thing because of like the hierarchy of race that white America has built for us. So all other like people of color try to kind of like pinpoint like certain things in the Black community that they don't like because we're all people of color, so we can comment on those things. But really, intersectionality should be about kind of like fixing the things in your own community and then trying to figure out where those issues actually match up in other communities rather than trying to tear that community out. So yeah, I'm basically done.
Okay, thank you so much, Ariel. That was really good. I particularly liked how you explained the cycle within complacence. I think that was really important. Right now, we are going to take a short-ish break. We will have the links to all the organizations and all of our activists and their handles at the end, so you can ask more questions about that when they explain in more detail. But for now, we would take a 5 to 7 minute-ish break, so you can go get water, or make a sandwich, or just relax for a little bit. Yeah. All right, okay, awesome. So welcome back, everyone. I'm going to see if we have more people joining us today, but if not, we can just begin. Okay, awesome. Thank you, everyone, for listening to our first three panelists. As I've said before, we will have their organizations linked down below after we finished with our other three panelists for today, and you can ask them more questions about that later. But for now, we will move on to Rye. Do you care to take it over?
If we do. So I'm going to be speaking specifically about violence against Black transgender women. I wrote some stuff up, and it's here somewhere. There it is. When we say that Black Lives Matter, it's implied that we're talking about all Black people, but Black trans women, Black trans people and specifically Black trans women are very often left out of the conversation. For example, these are just five of the Black trans women who were killed this year, and all of them were killed during Pride Month. These aren't isolated incidents, and they're part of a wider epidemic. If we're going to be allies to the Black community, we need to extend that allyship towards Black trans people. For example, I, as part of both the Black Student Union and Alliance at my school, I've tried to bring those two groups together during Black History Month to talk about my experience as a Black trans person. But I'm often told, or I'm often shut down or told that it's just not something that people want to hear about, which is damaging mainly because we're a small part of the population, but we're responsible for so many things. Mercy Mack, Tatiana Hall, Brayla Stone, Dominique Fells, and Rhea Melton didn't get a chance to experience a level of solidarity being expressed towards them, but that doesn't mean that their deaths need to be in vain. I think that the society as a whole needs to stand up for people who are marginalized, and even though that's talked about a lot, not a whole lot of action is shown towards that. The culture around acceptance needs to change, mainly because almost all Black trans women who are killed by men of color. And that's not to say that like all men are bad or anything. I mean, I'm a man, so that's not the stance I'd be taking. But I think that there really needs to be a conversation about acceptance within groups of people of color and also just within society as a whole, because these killings aren't going to stop until everyone can see each other as equals. That's basically it. My experiences as a Black trans person have been scary. As someone who doesn't pass very well, a lot of times I just find that it's safer not to tell people that I'd prefer to be referred to as male. And I know that a lot of Black trans women specifically have that problem where they can still pass very well, but if they get into a romantic situation with someone and they don't tell that person in, say, like a public area that they're trans, it can lead to violence towards them. For example, I saw a woman last year who was in her apartment building with a man that she was interested in dating, and she told him that she was trans, and he pushed her over the edge of the balcony. She survived, but it was a horrible act of violence, and a lot of times people who murder Black trans women aren't prosecuted. For example, Marsha P. Johnson was a really big part of the Pride movement. She was at the Stonewall Inn and threw the shot glass around the world, starting the gay Pride movement. And she was murdered in New York, and there was no investigation into it because it was New York in the 80s. So I think that even though we think that things have changed, they haven't completely, just because these vicious crimes keep happening. And I think that educating ourselves and educating other people, supporting groups like the Black Trans Coalition, and just being good allies towards Black trans people can not only change lives, but save lives. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ron, for sharing. So we are running a little bit short on time, but I think we will be fine. Thank you so much for sharing. I think it's really important to be inclusive. When we say Black Lives Matter, to be inclusive of all Black people. And I think that's something that I have learned throughout the course of being a rising activist or a sprouting activist. And I think that's something that should be shared today in our space. Next, we will move to Amira. Yeah, take it away.
Hi, everyone. Again, my name is Amira Auditoro, she, her, hers, and I first just want to say that I'm humbled to be able to take part in ACE's initiative in continuing an important conversation that's being had in our society today. I think it's very safe to say that a significant amount of human rights issues are plaguing this nation, and there are vital changes to be made, as important as it is to be showing up for the Black community, whether online, through signing petitions, donating if possible, spreading awareness, and even attending protests. There is also potential for great change in settings such as these, taking the time to come together and understand the roots of the issues Black people in America are facing today, listening and learning from Black stories and Black pain, and understanding why it's essential for all to be catalysts for the solutions. Many people adopt the notion that issues being addressed in the Black Lives Matter movement are Black people problems that don't impact them and therefore don't require their attention. And this individualist mentality is a main factor in what's holding up the systems oppressing Black people today. The idea that I am not racist is good enough needs to be eradicated completely, especially by non-Black POC who feel that as long as white people are labeled kind of the main enemy, that they personally can do no wrong. And an example of this would be kind of the excuse made by many in non-POC communities who say that it's okay that they say the N-word because they're not white. Situations like these are where the important discussion of solidarity must come into play. When non-Black POC contribute to the oppression of Black people, it further divides the minority communities and empowers the supremacy of a common oppressor. Systemic racism and its effects may largely marginalize the Black community. However, overall, it isn't Black people's problem to deal with, but rather a human rights issue that should upset all people. And if you aren't upset, then you aren't paying attention. And at the end of the day, those in power, white people, are responsible for understanding that the systems they put in place are highly biased and corrupt and definitely in need of change. But everyone, especially non-Black POC, should be helping to obtain that justice for those who have gone long unseen and unheard. And I'm sure we've all heard the famous quote by Angela Davis that says, in a racist society, it is not enough to be non-racist, we must be anti-racist. I like to say that I'm never one to applaud a fish for swimming because denouncing racism should be the bare minimum. Black lives mattering should be the bare minimum. And in efforts towards solidarity, it's always good to remember that standing up in the face of injustice should be everyone's business, because before anything else, we're all human beings. So standing up for your Black brothers, sisters, people as a non-Black POC means that you acknowledge the privilege that you have in being non-Black, and that you don't abuse it in remaining silent or contributing to the struggles in the Black community. That's what kind of solidarity is all about, really. And with that being said, an exceptional amount of support is necessary, of course, from the white community, both in race and ethnicity. I'm from Weston, Florida, and I actually just graduated from a high school of 5,000 students. And a rampant debate was sparked actually last year when a student made a documentary uplifting the voices of our 4% Black community. In this documentary, they made it known that our school, as is our city, was predominantly white, which seemed to be a large issue for those who were kind of uneducated about the difference between race and ethnicity. These race regards externally imposed physical differences, such as skin color and kind of facial features, and that's what leads to references such as Black. Ethnicity, however, kind of regards communities that share specific ancestral or cultural practices, like when people say Italians or Irish people, stuff like that. And ethnically, Weston is a city highly dominated by the Latinx community. However, since a large amount of Hispanic and Latinos are in fact white passing by race, of course, this privilege can't be ignored. Thus, we technically are a predominantly white city. And people, it's very hard to have the white privilege discussion in my community because a lot of people like to think that their struggles in life automatically cancel out any of their race-based privilege. But it's important for people to understand that a white privilege does not mean you've never faced hardships, but rather that the color of your skin has never contributed to any of those hardships, as it has for POC and especially Black people. And about a month ago, a group of student leaders invited me to join them in planning a Black Lives Matter protest in our city. And I was very shocked to discover that no attempts regarding advocating for racial equality had ever been prompted in Weston before. As a matter of fact, people denied and still deny the existence of racism in the community. We kind of call it the Weston bubble because ignorance really has created a blindfold of like indifference over the eyes of those who choose to wear it. And rest assured, though, the people I involved myself with made it a mission to pop that bubble and force people to see not only the injustices happening in our world, but in this kind of so-called perfect town. And we had members receive threats from adults in the community as we planned a peaceful demonstration, only motivating us to be even more prepared for counteracts. And despite the fear-mongering, none of our plans were stifled as a successful and safe 300-person protest went into effect that day. And since then, we attend city commission meetings and make countless efforts to keep the momentum of this movement alive, still facing remarkable backlash from racists, as expected, who call us terrorists, Marxists, and a book full of relentless comments. But regardless, the conversation has been started and it's not going anywhere soon. Holding people, especially those in power, accountable for injustice is a very helpful tool towards real change, and it's necessary, if anything. Black members of our communities are still members of the community, no matter how small in presence. Minority does not equate to non-existence and definitely not unimportance. So I think that the efforts to ensure Black voices are finally being heard is going to continue for as long as necessary until genuine solutions are put into effect. So yeah, I kind of just want to give a shout out to Black Lives Matter Weston for all the great work. And if you guys would like to support it, any of the changes we are trying to make inside of the community, we are at BLM Weston on Instagram. But yeah, actually a lot of the organizers are teenagers and students. So it's not really surprising that a great deal of the changes that we saw needed to be made were within the school systems. I believe it was Toby who very powerfully captured the systemic aspects of racism in education. So I'm going to kind of address a different branch of this and saying that the power of education and school as a source of secondary socialization is so immense. And oftentimes, like we know, kids spend more time with teachers during the school year than their own families. So the idea that some Black students, for some Black students, school has become a place where they can't feel comfortable in their own skin is unacceptable. And in my community specifically, we don't really have the luxury, most do, of kind of looking around the hallways and seeing faces that don't really look like ours, or sitting in classrooms and not having to fear you're going to be singled out as this token Black, which is really just kind of a pat on the back for the system to check off the diversity box, while many Black students are left feeling outnumbered rather than welcomed. You know, in a sea of kids who think that it's okay to compare their weekend tans to my dark skin, or pet my twists like I'm a rare exhibit and not a human being. And white teachers throw around the N-word for a lesson on literature. And then when we ask for kids to be taught on the weight of such a derogatory term, or even something other than white history and white contributions to this country, it suddenly becomes a problem. I think that the underrepresentation of Black students in schools contributes to a lot of the ignorance of many people when it comes to Black issues, and often remarkable prejudice results from when schools are ill-equipped to handle situations in which racism occurs on campus. And a lot of what we need is more Black history classes, first of all, and Black teachers to be filling the halls with education based on facts and experiences. Part of Black Lives Matter Weston's plans also included advocating for a diversity board within our city, because above all, we need Black voices to make Black choices that will actually like impact Black people for the benefit, for the better. So yeah, like making sure that you have leaders in your communities who see Black issues, who see our color and who want to be a catalyst for positive change in the Black community is necessary in every area possible. And with that being said, I kind of just wanted to quickly emphasize the importance of voting in your local elections and exercising the right to vote at all for those who are eligible, because it's not really okay that young people are allowing the same elderly, white, one-track minded people to be making decisions for a highly diverse groups. And ignorance in this day and age is just choice, considering that there's a surplus of information at our fingertips and ways to get involved, because people who are typically very loud on social media have gone silent in these times, as I'm sure we've all seen, because they claim that they don't have a real platform to make a difference, when honestly, we all have the platform to make an impact, whether great or small. And the best thing that the Black community needs from you all is to take the opportunity to do so whenever you can. So like, as far as kind of personal experiences and what I've learned in recent times, over the last few months, I've definitely come to terms with the fact that some people might like me as a person, but that doesn't mean that they care at all about Black people and Black lives. And as disheartening as that sounds, the importance of solidarity comes in times like this more than ever. Being there for your Black peers in these times as we're pleading for the bare minimum in this nation to simply matter, despite the fact that Black lives are so much more, is essential. Black lives are loved, important, essential, honestly, everything in between. And this, like a lot of people have been mentioning, it's intersectional. So honestly, it can never hurt to take a few moments to sign petitions to obtain justice for the many lives who fall victim to a system never built to protect them. Email your representatives and make your voice be known. Share helpful resources for assistance to the Black community and Black businesses, as well as educate yourself and those around you. If possible, make donations to the Black Lives Matter organization. And for those who can't, there are a variety of YouTube videos that donate for you through ads as you watch them when you search up BLM Stream to Donate. And attend protests, or you can even organize your own, because it's essential not only to be an ally, but an accomplice in gaining racial equality. While allies are there for support as they recognize inequality and privilege as appreciated, accomplices actively work to dismantle the oppressive systems. And they expect hard work and no recognition, really, and they utilize their privilege for the greater good rather than just acknowledging it. And I kind of just want to finish off by recommending some enlightening works that can serve as outlets to educate, such as When They See Us, The Racial Wealth Gap, and 13th, which are all on Netflix. Avoid films that incorporate this essence of a white savior or a character who is kind of there to be the hero for Black characters facing injustice, like To Kill a Mockingbird, The Blind Side, The Help. There's always more ways to kind of do better and be better and educate yourself, listening to Black people and what they have to say. Like, this is a great way to do so right now. I just want to emphasize that while not everyone can do everything, we can all do something. And yeah, thank you so much for your time. It was a pleasure to be on this panel. Yeah, I'm just about done.
Thank you so much. That was really well said. Thank you for sharing with us. Next, we will go to Madison. She is here. Take it away, Madison.
Yeah, hi everyone. So my name is Madison Hilliard. I'm just recently turned 17 years old and I live in New Orleans, Louisiana. And basically I wanted to talk about different ways that you can support Black Lives Matter and kind of how you can be a good ally, because I've noticed like a lot of my friends contact me and they're like, well, obviously we know that things are wrong and we see that things need to change, but sometimes you kind of have this feeling where you're not, like you don't know where to start to help. And also sometimes you feel kind of lost because you see a lot of people doing a lot of different things and you just don't know where to start. So I kind of wanted to talk to everybody and tell you different ways you can start. So the first way is obviously give donations. The Strategist has an article which is basically 142 ways to donate in support of Black lives and communities of color. It's a super good resources. They have the name of the organization, a donation link, and kind of a quick summary of what the organization does, where they're located, stuff like that. So that's a super good resource to start. Obviously, the Black Lives Matter organization has a donate link on their website, and that's always, a really great automatic resource to donate to. Also, the Bail Project, which pays bail money to people in jail pre-trial to combat mass incarceration. And I didn't really find out about this project until about, I would say, like a month or so ago. And they actually pay money for like people who can't afford to pay their bail, because if they haven't been on trial yet, they actually can still be arrested and held in jail for days or weeks or even months. And that's kind of what contributes to mass incarceration. Disproportionately, African Americans are impacted by this. So the Bail Project helps to combat that by actually, getting people out of that situation pre-trial. And also another good resource is Amnesty. I have a really huge Amnesty club at my school, and they've also, they're just an incredible resource on anything and everything, not just Black Lives Matter. So definitely look into that. And if you can't donate, obviously you can go out and protest. Right now, obviously there's a lot going on with COVID-19. And so it's super dangerous for some people like myself with already pre-existing health conditions. But if you can participate in local in-person protests, and you can also participate in Blackout Days. July 7th was the most recent one, where basically you spend your money at Black-owned businesses, or you don't buy anything at all for that day. But yeah, so on the next slide, I have a couple more things that you can do. So yeah, so another really important one is amplify Black voices. So listen to your Black peers and try to learn and understand their experiences. Some people feel really uncomfortable kind of talking about race because it's just like an uncomfortable topic for some people, and that's okay. It's sometimes really, really hard to have these conversations, but I think it's important to realize that these uncomfortable conversations need to be had, especially if you want to help. Sometimes it really does help just asking one of your friends, like, hey, can we talk? And sometimes not everybody does want to talk about it, but if you do know somebody who does, reach out to them, and y'all can just have like a conversation, and you can ask questions if you want to, just to get that better understanding. Also, you can support Black content creators, educators, and business owners. One of my personal favorites, just to get historical education, is the Ferris State University Jim Crow Museum. It's an in-person museum, but they also have a website with so much expansive information. I mean, on any time period, just kind of like highlighting the Black experience and talking about what Black people experienced at different times in history. And I'm always referring to it as a resource kind of just to learn. Even like it dispels a lot of rumors, also like different things that you might hear on social media and be like, oh, well, let me look into that. And that's a really good one just to learn like solid information. And it pretty much stacks up from slavery all the way to now. So I personally love that resource. And also share your knowledge with others. If you find out something that, is maybe not known, or even if you think it might be known, not everybody knows everything. So it's also really good if you find something like a really good resource, or if you see, I don't know, for example, I've seen a lot of TikToks right now on people's social media, like they post them to share knowledge and kind of get messages out to other people. So if you see something, feel free to share it. I think a lot of people are scared kind of like of messing up their social media image or something by being a downer. But, it's an important cause, and it doesn't really, like, you have to make a change if you want to make a change. Like, if you want to do something, you actually have to do something. And, that might mean like not really focusing so much on, just like posting selfies or fun videos. This is a really big cause, and it needs us, the youth, to participate in it and actually, actively try to push it forward. One of my other personal favorites is signing petitions. Change.org is amazing for this. I have no idea how many petitions. It takes you pretty much like I would say 2 or 3 minutes once you just get a change.org account, and then you can just scroll, and then just like sign, and also share them after. So you usually have an option after you sign the petition, you can either share or donate. And if you can't donate, you can obviously just copy the link and send it out to people or post it on your story. And that's a good way to, you know, get people backing the right causes. Also, you can advocate. So you can contact your congressional representatives to encourage policy changes. One of those is decriminalizing minor drug offenses. That's something that really makes a super positive impact. I believe in Portugal in 2001, they basically made minor drug offenses, like they just said, like, that's fine. And they've had an incredible turnaround. Like, it's super positive because usually minor drug offenses disproportionately affect Black and Brown people. So getting rid of that is something, like, if you don't know where to start, that's a really good one for people kind of to back behind and kind of put that into discussion with people who need to hear it. Also, governing.com is a really good resource if you want to look into kind of different things that Black Lives Matter, that the Black Lives Matter movement is kind of backing, and also like understand what those things mean. Like, there's been a lot of talking around what it means to defund the police. And so if you like want to look into like different words and like actually see what those things mean, because it does not mean just like taking 100% of the money away from police and not having police officers in communities. That's not it. So governing.com is a really good resource if you want to look into those things more in depth. And also another one is educate yourself and others. And, you know, I said this a couple seconds ago, you know, share knowledge with others. But one really good place to start is 13th for police brutality. It's very eye-opening. And I mean, I watch it pretty much, I would say like once a week, and I'm always picking up new things. It's very deep and it's filled with so much educational value. So yeah, thank you guys so much for being here, because this is honestly a really important step in the process, you know, listening to African Americans and kind of like, you know, hearing about our experiences. So I commend you all for being a part of that. And I thank you guys so much for giving me the platform to do that. So yeah.
Okay, awesome. Thank you so much, Madison. Thank you for sharing. Next, we will open the platform up to everyone who is the audience here. Just remember to type ready in the chat box if you have anything to say, any question to ask. If it's a short question, you can also just type the question in the chat box. That's all right too. But yeah, so the space is open to you now. I see Sasha wants to speak on something.
Yeah, so I just want to say, like, thank you so much to all the panelists. That was like one of my favorite panels I think that I've ever experienced. I think so recently, I guess this is like an experience tied into a question. So recently, so I go to private school, and it's like it's more diverse than my public school, because I live in a predominantly white town, and going to private school, there's definitely more people of color there, but it's still predominantly white. So recently a girl posted on her Instagram saying that she didn't believe that white privilege exists and all this, and you know, it really didn't sit well with our whole like POC community, and a lot of people started talking to her about it and trying to. So, well, some people were trying to fight her and others were trying to help educate her. But I guess my question is just, but she wasn't really listening, and I've had like conversations with people that won't listen before. So how do you, I guess when you face someone like that and you really want to help educate them and kind of show them the other perspective, I don't know, do you guys have any like tips or like ways to kind of help get your message across? Because my dad was always telling me like, oh, like just let them be, like they're entitled to their own opinion, you don't have to say anything. But like it's really hard for me to not want to say anything.
I see Rai and Ariel want to answer. You guys can both share this question. Thank you.
Okay. I think that anyone who I think I don't think anyone has a bad opinion, but I think that some opinions can be damaging to other people. So I think people who have these kinds of damaging opinions, a lot of times there's just no way to get through to them because they're unwilling to see the other side. But if the person seems like they're showing a willingness to learn, I've had the experience of like asking questions and being like, okay, have you ever been followed around in a store? Have you ever been, have you ever had your parents pulled over by the police for no reason? Have you ever been called a slur? Like things like that. Because sometimes I can help people to see like, oh, well, these things haven't happened to me. So it's like, then why are you saying that you don't have privilege if these are all things that have happened to me? But yeah, some people just won't listen. And a lot of times those people are those people who just want to get a rise out of you. So that's why I try not to like fight people, no matter how much I may want to, because it doesn't help the issue. And it's not really going to accomplish much.
Okay, thank you so much. I see Ariel also wants to answer.
Oh, well, I guess Bri kind of said everything. Basically, yeah, you can't like change some people's decision because again, like people, like we literally had slavers. So obviously there's like a human capacity to just like be like a piece of crap to other people, like regardless of what you're presented with. Like people will die racist and like that's just going to happen. But again, like Bri said, like you just have to like come at them with more kind of like empathetic techniques. Like how would you feel if insert scenario here to, you know, they're denying basically the existence of something happening.
Yeah, definitely. I also see Amira wants to answer as well.
Yeah, they both definitely wrapped it up pretty well. I kind of just wanted to also emphasize that the importance of coming towards people who seem to have an opinion like that Rai said is very damaging, with kind of not being gentle, but, you know, providing them with as many resources as possible to let them understand where you're coming from. Some people don't provide evidence or backing up their points at all, and they kind of just, like it was said, they just want to argue with you, or they kind of just want to get a reaction out of you, because at times ignorance definitely is bliss, people. When you have white privilege, people who don't want to use it for good and they just want to abuse it, there's a lot of people like that. And at the end of the day, if you lay out all of the resources you have and you go to them with empathy and you're kind of just coming to them from a place of kind of wanting them to understand and be an ally, and they reject it, then at the end of the day, there's really nothing you can do to kind of force them. As long as they have all the resources right there in front of them and you've provided them with every opportunity you can, there's nothing that can really be done as far as kind of like there's no point in really fighting someone on such issues, because some people are just unwilling to change, and that's an issue on them for sure. So yeah.
Okay, awesome. Sasha, does that answer your question a little bit more?
Yeah, actually, thank you so much.
Okay, thank you. Next we will move on to Camille.
Hi. So I have a question for like adult educators in like predominantly white communities. I know that nobody here is an adult educator, but like I guess like suggestions for like what they should do, because they are kind of in positions of power to create change. And so what do you think like the difference is between spotlighting the voices of marginalized Black people who are the minority in the community versus tokenizing them or making them feel otherized? Because it seems really important to spotlight these underrepresented voices, but there's also kind of a slippery slope, and the line can be hard to distinguish.
Okay, I see Toby wants to answer as well.
Yeah, I can take this one. So I think coming from a very small, very predominantly white school, I definitely understand this question a lot, or at least I can relate to it very well. I think you really need to start like from early education. I know one of my friends just recently did one of those like Instagram question things, asking what was the first book by a Black author or with Black characters that you read. And so many people were saying, oh, like 9th grade, we read A Raisin in the Sun, or like 10th grade, we read Invisible Man, or like 11th graders in 12th grade. And so I think right off the bat, if you start in high school, if you start like late in school when people have already been introduced to racism, and then you say, oh, we're going to read one book this year that shows why racism is bad, that automatically tokenizes it and makes it just very other, when really Black education, African American education needs to be integrated into school like as early as possible. Like in kindergarten, kids should be reading books with Black characters in them. And besides that, I think in high school, for older students, I think it's really important that teachers don't call out Black students as maybe thinking they would understand racism or some of the intricacies of like Jim Crow South just because they're Black. Because I know I've had teachers call on me and be like, how does this make you feel? Right now it makes me feel uncomfortable because you're calling me out in front of the entire class. So yeah, I think that's kind of the main things.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. I see Ariel also wants to answer the question.
Yeah, so basically for like educators, we need to like implement, like when we get older, I'd like us to all try to implement kind of like diversity within schools, like some type of committee, because a lot of times it just happens that you accidentally hire a racist teacher, because racism can just include all those like microaggressions and like micro labeling and all that, like just like the smaller kind of nuances of racism that a lot of teachers don't address, because there is just like majority white people, so they don't have to address it with their colleagues, and then when they're students, there's a minority of them, it just never crosses their mind, because like a lot of misconceptions is that like people of color, all people of color students are poor, right? Like obviously there is a certain statistic to that, like a majority of like Black kids usually come from single parent households or low income households. That doesn't mean that necessarily like the teacher should go in and like try to coddle that student, because then that coddling creates that, like makes them a token minority, because then they basically get put on this pedestal of like, oh, you're the star quarterback or whatever. Yeah, you don't need to make good grades because you're a big Black man and we can use you as like the face of our magazine or whatever. So with that, we just have to like be more conscious of the fact that there's not things in place to help prevent microaggressions. So that's where most of that type of stuff in school comes
from. Thank you so much. That was a really good answer. Next, let me see the chat. Next we have Joy.
Yeah, this is kind of a question for all of you guys. So are there any like microaggressions that people are unconsciously doing that are especially harmful, or like how do allies avoid using harmful language and like creating an uncomfortable space?
Ryan wants to answer.
Specifically, like putting Black people up on a pedestal is one thing. We're human beings. We make mistakes, even if it's Black History Month or even if Black Lives Matter is still in the news. I had one friend text me, and someone I hadn't talked to in years text me and apologize for racism and apologize that bad things had happened in my life surrounding race and that she wanted to change them, but she had no idea what I had gone through.
It was weird. It was a weird thing for someone to say. But I think just like those things that explicitly show a lot of white guilt are not great, because that's not going to help. It's only going to, it's kind of like when like someone comes out to you as gay or bi or trans, and then someone makes that entirely about themselves, or like if you misgender a trans person and then you go on for hours that like someone said like if you it's like you killed their cat or something. Just being able to recognize that if someone corrects you, that's not an invitation for you to talk about how bad you've done. It's just you should internalize that and then change your behavior and thinking. So the short answer is white guilt.
Okay, awesome. Do Felix and Toby want to add on to that?
Yeah, I feel like this isn't even necessarily like fall under the bracket of like microaggressions, but like just seeing like all sorts of native mascots and like names, like literally using racial slurs and just like the normalization of that is so damaging. And people will be like, oh, like reference these polls, like 9 out of 10 Native Americans like agree that that's not offensive, and it's like you can't say that because you're not Native, so it's not your place to talk about. And so just like constantly seeing that, and that's the only representation your people get in anywhere, is a racial slur and a racist depiction of your people, and not great. And it just like school mascots, and it's everywhere. And I know there's this one school I saw on social media that they literally have like their football team does like fake like Native American war cries, and they have their cheerleaders dance up as Native women, and their band members dress up in like powwow uniforms, and just like the way our culture is depicted is just so damaging, and over time like really can be harmful.
Toby, do you want to add on to that?
Yeah, super quickly, just like jumping off of all of that, I think something really big for me that, might be well-meaning, but it doesn't help anything, is kind of just maybe like sharing stories about like racism like within your family or like within your community, and that's it. Like you're just telling me the stories, and you didn't do anything, you're just a bystander. I think people will do that kind of to calm like maybe their guilt a little bit by like telling a Black person like, oh, at work yesterday someone was super racist, and I'll be like, so what did you do? And they're like, oh, I didn't do anything, I just wanted to tell you. That's not productive. It kind of just makes me feel a little bit bad, and that's it. So I think that's something that should be thought about in the future.
Okay, thank you. Joy, does that help answer your question a little bit better?
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, awesome. Next, we're going to go to Olivia. I think she has something to say, and also another question.
Yeah, I just wanted to touch on someone's question about like white teachers like having token Black students as opposed to like wanting to hear their experiences. And I think it's a lot about intention. Like if a white teacher like asks a collection of their like Blacker students of color about their experiences, and they genuinely want to educate themselves in the class, as opposed to them like, oh, don't worry, I'm not racist, I have Black students and I care about them. I just think it's a lot about intention in that case. And my question is, I've heard this thing, I don't know what it's technically called, I've heard it referred to as white feminism, where like white women will be feminist, but only for white women. I wanted to see if you guys had seen any cases of that and how it can be like detrimental to the other excluded communities.
Okay, I see Amira, Felix, Toby, and Rai. They want to answer the question. Let's go in that order.
I've definitely seen a lot of cases, not even just with feminism, but with specific groups who will only advocate for their group when in times of injustice, and not, and I've seen a lot of people who have been talking about this. I know we mentioned a lot about intersectionality and how these overarching issues affect multiple communities. So if you're calling yourself an activist and you're standing up for injustice, it should be for any and all situations. And I definitely think it's important to, I think a lot of people consider, calling out kind of an aggressive like term, but honestly, really to address with people when they are, seeming to stick to their one group of injustice because it impacts them. And then they're silent when it pertains to a multitude of other issues, kind of just emphasizing the idea that, oh, hey, like, did you hear this happened, this feminist situation happened in, XYZ, Black community, Latinx community, all these other areas, kind of just letting them know that this is not something that sure, they are impacted by white feminism, but if they genuinely are a feminist, it will kind of spread out into multiple groups and caring about, feminism for Black people, for white people, for every overarching group. So yeah.
Does Felix want to add on to that?
Yeah, I would say like one big example is missing and murdered Indigenous women. Like I don't see a lot of like major women's groups speaking out on this issue, and it is affecting women and girls. And so not seeing that is just really harmful to the Indigenous community overall. And it's just one big example of white women really showing up for white women.
All right, thank you. That was a really good point. Does Toby want to elaborate?
Yeah, so I saw this headline. I read this article a couple weeks ago that said that white feminism is white supremacy in heels, and that essentially is what that essentially encapsulates everything that white feminism is. Because at its heart, white feminism is only feminism insofar that it doesn't make too many people uncomfortable, so that it doesn't make white men in power uncomfortable, so that it doesn't make so it doesn't ask for too much radical change, and that is like I cannot describe how harmful that is, especially if people are self-described activists but then won't actually advocate and do their jobs, because at its heart, activism and feminism and everything is radical. It's radical change. Like we want radical change and equality, and this has a huge historical basis too, like the role that white women have in relation to Black men. White women are often seen as like taken advantage of by Black men, and you can see this in like classic films, Birth of a Nation, like literally dozens of films. So there's a huge historical basis for this as well, and I think it is super, super harmful.
Okay, thank you so much. Rai and Ariel also want to add on.
I'm gonna keep this as concise as possible, but I know that a lot of the propaganda and like the beliefs of white feminism also feed into the TERF community. TERFs are trans exclusionary radical feminists who claim to be for feminism. They claim to be for equality. They just also think trans women are men, which is it's hard because a lot of people who are TERFs have big platforms and they're also identify somewhere else within the LGBT community. So they talk about how they're trying to maybe kind of keep the community like closed. And they talk about how they're trying to be for inclusivity, but they are actively doing the same thing that homophobes are doing and that transphobes are doing. So it's just a giant double standard. This was brought to a lot of people's minds when J.K. Rowling started talking about trans women, which was a ride. But I think that if you're going to be an activist and you're going to stand for something, like you're going to stand for feminism, the equality of the genders, you need to go all the way. You can't just cherry pick who you think needs to be equal.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you. Ariel, do you want to add one last thing?
Yeah, super quick. I feel like a lot of people, when we're talking about feminism, a lot of people forget that like the original like American foundation for feminism was white feminism. Like who was, I forget, it was the wife of the president at the time. Why am I blanking? But basically, she like made the women's suffrage movement, but only for white women, because white women were the only ones to get the right to vote in 1919. Because Black women didn't get the right to vote till 1964. Indigenous women didn't get the right to vote till, anybody can correct me, but I believe it was sometime in the 50s. Like people of color, like women of color, were not included in feminism until like our mom's generation ago. Like that's when they started actually including women of color. So never forget that.
All right, thank you for the history lesson. I see Camille and Rye said it was Eleanor Roosevelt who started the women's suffrage movement, made it kind of exclusive to white women only. We're going to take one more question, I think from Gian, if you still have one.
Yeah. So I know Sasha asked something similar, but she was more referring to someone who wouldn't listen. But what happens if the someone who won't listen is like a bit closer to home? Like, what if it's someone you really respect, like your parents or aunts and uncles, or like a really close friend, like someone that you wouldn't want to lose? Yeah. How would you just deal with that? And
okay, I see Felix, Toby, Amira, and Ariel want to answer. Can we go in that order?
Yeah. I know a couple years ago, back in middle school, I had sort of the same problem. It was one of my really closer friends who was like completely nice to me outside of the fact that she would like be super like microaggressive to me, and she would be like, I hate people who speak Spanish the way I speak Spanish, which is the way it's intended to be spoken with an accent, and just like all these microaggressions. And I just, at that point, I was like, this is part of me. And so when you're talking about my Spanish, that's me. And so that's another form of like basically not being my friend. And I can't take that away. And so realizing that these are certain things are part of you, and telling people that like I speak Spanish, that is part of me. And so when you're saying all these microaggressive things, you are essentially like attacking part of me, is something that I've found people can resonate more with.
Thank you. Does Toby want to add on to that?
Yeah. So I think first of all, like talking with your parents, your family members, like your closest friends, about Black Lives Matter, about other movements, like who aren't receptive, it really is like one of the hardest things like to do, I think, as an ally, because you're putting your own relationships on the line. But I think what you need to do is relate, like if you are a person of color and like you have family because, oh, since we're also people of color, like I don't understand like why Black people like are so mad about this and we're not mad about this. Explain the differences in like how you ended up in America versus like how Black people ended up in America. Like we started in fundamentally different places and we've ended in pretty much fundamentally different places, which I think is something a lot of people of color don't understand. And that's not to say that other people of color haven't had struggles. It's just to say that our struggles are very different. And by trying to generalize all of them, you really miss a large part of the conversation. You know, if you don't go back 400 years, then you won't understand. And also minor plug, but Students for Black Lives, we created a toolkit that answers like this exact question, like that will help you talk to your family members and your friends like this. So I'm just gonna put the link in the chat and you can check that out if you want to.
I actually think I can do that. Oh, she already did. Okay, cool. Let's move on to, no, it's fine. Let's move on to Mira and Ariel to answer Joan's question.
Yeah, I think those were both two very good points that were made. I think that when it comes to friends, I know that I've experienced in these times, people that I respect and I looked up to, who like me as a person, don't necessarily like Black people, or they don't necessarily feel that it is their duty to kind of acknowledge their privilege and kind of stand up in the face of injustice. I know when it comes to family, like Toby said, it's definitely one of the more difficult conversations to be had, especially because you are, putting your relationships with people who you love and you respect at risk. I've definitely found that it's easy when you do connect yourself to these situations, because people like to think that, oh, I don't know this person, and make all these assumptions when it could easily be, this and this person. When you kind of connect it to, like, I know that I've seen, like, when I've had conversations with family members who, say that, they like to make generalizations and they like to kind of try and distance themselves from situations. But if I say, oh, like that could be me in that situation, it kind of flips their perspective a lot when people like to essentially kind of think that, it's not about this isn't, you know, a lot of people like to connect the Black Lives Matter movement to George Floyd when it's a much bigger issue. It's not about one person or one specific incident. It's definitely a much longer incident that's been going on for 400 years, really, and kind of bringing people back to that and making them understand that this is not just about one specific situation, and it could easily be this person in this situation, and kind of understanding that you have to, you know, tie yourself to these people and kind of empathize, really. Like, I found that trying to, you know, instill empathy in a lot of the conversations that I've had is what gets through to people usually, because a lot of what's happening in this world is very inhumane. And so, yeah, I've definitely found that that helps. I send them resources, of course, and lots of things that can help get the conversation going, because a lot of people like to run and hide from those conversations because it's uncomfortable, but it's definitely necessary. So, yeah.
Great. Thank you so much. That was a really cohesive answer. We're going to take our last bit of input from Ariel, if that's okay.
Yeah, so basically you kind of just have to put them, whoever it is that you're talking to, in the shoes of the person, or if it makes it better to personalize, put yourself in their shoes and convey that situation. But honestly, personally for me, if you're denying another individual their humanity and their personhood, I don't want to, I don't want to have a relationship with you, because at that point, because at least for me, being queer, it's easier to hide my queerness than it is to hide my Blackness, right? So if people say microaggressive stuff about, if they're queerphobic, it's easier to kind of write that off. But at the same time, I try not to associate with them because of that. But when it comes to race, and the fact that it's so prevalent in society, for your friends, I feel like if they're too far gone, you have that conversation with them, you're like, okay, but what if you were in that situation, or what if I was in that situation, and you still can't get through them, then you're just gonna have to cut off that toxic person in your life. Obviously that's up for you to decide if it's toxic. But then for family members, I just don't associate with them. For some people that's harder to do, depending on the strength of your relationship. But half of my family is queerphobic, so I just don't talk to them, because then if I do, I'll slip up and say something, and they'll be like, oh, that's nasty. Or they'll slip up and say something and be like, oh, I hate, gay people. And I'm like, I don't know what you want me to say in response to that, because I can't be like, yeah, fuck gays. I can't, in good health. So always just be considerate of who you're talking to and why they might be saying the things that they're saying. Because if you can change that why, then usually you can change their thought process. But if you can't, if they're too far gone, then you just have to take it. I don't know. I'm sorry if that didn't help them a lot, but yeah.
Great. Thank you everyone for your questions and your answers. I think we are kind of closing in on our 2-hour limit, but let's go to the last slide where we see everybody's organizations and affiliations. So hopefully you guys can all get connected. I will try and paste these in right now so you can access them through the chat box. But first we have Polluters Out, This is 0 Hour, and Generation Ratified, the Virginia chapter from Felix. And then we have Students for Black Lives, which is a part of Toby's political organization, and NOLA's Children and Youth Planning Board, which is Madison's organization. And then we have Black Lives Matter, Weston chapter, which is Amira's. So if any of the panelists want to go into more detail, or just to do a quick, I don't know, self-promo, that's okay too. And then we have our handles from some of our panelists, which I will also put down here. Go ahead, Toby.
Okay, I figured I would talk about Students for Black Lives a little bit, because from the introductions, I know a lot of you guys are in high school or maybe rising senior, so you would be interested. But basically, Students for Black Lives, we offer free college mentoring and tutoring services. If you donate to a Black Lives Matter charity, it's $10, honestly, negligible donation. And if you aren't able to pay, we also have a student fund where people will donate in place of other students. So you can either donate to that if you don't need help, or you can take advantage of that if you do need help. So yeah, very quick
Awesome. Thank you so much. So all in all, hopefully everyone who has joined this webinar has gotten, was able to take something away from this experience. I really hope that we can continue these webinar series because like I think one of the panelists said, this isn't just a one-time thing. We should continue these bi-monthly conversations to hopefully open up the space more and make people understand the importance of intersectionality in activism and solidarity with Black Lives Matter. And so hopefully we can all see your faces again at our next webinar soon into the school year. I just want to say thank you to our 6 panelists for coming here. It means a lot personally to me that you are able to dedicate some of your time to talk about these really important issues. We do want everyone to tell us what things we can improve on, give us a little bit of criticism because this is our first webinar and we don't want to ignore your voice in this new project. So definitely email us at Asian Youth Vote. And this goes for the panelists and the audience. I will kind of give the mic over to Nina to kind of plug our organization and what we do, just so you can contact us more if you have any more questions.
Yeah, so first of all, thank you all for coming and thank you for the 6 panelists for giving such great conversations and just allowing us to be more educated on issues. But before we go, I wanted to quickly shout out our Instagram, which is at Asian Youth Vote. I think Abby will put that into the chat as well. So that way you can keep up with our future webinars and be able to have access to those events as well. So yeah, so thank you all for coming once more and I hope you guys have a great rest of your day.
Okay, thank you so much. Yeah, we don't really have a planned opening, but thank you so much for coming. Thank you to our panelists. If you have any friend you want to refer over or any prominent youth activists that you think would like to participate in this for the next webinar, we definitely are open to that. Just ask them to contact us at asianyouthvote@gmail.com. And we take a lot of criticism as well as because this is our first webinar. So thank you all for coming. We'll see you hopefully next time.